Adriana Villela is a senior developer advocate at ServiceNow Cloud Observability, formerly LightStep, blogger, CNCF Ambassador, and host of the Geeking Out Podcast. In this conversation, we discuss Adriana's brief pivot out of tech into photography, the beauty of rock climbing, OpenTelemetry, and the shift to Observability 2.0.
Adriana, welcome to my fun and exciting and awe-inspiring and even sometimes a little mysterious podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's Friday today, so I'm like super stoked for the weekend. How are you?
I'm doing good. I've got one, foot dipped in PTO, so next week I'm going to be out. So it's, double awesome for me. It's Friday, and
Nice.
there's nothing like PTO staring you down. So
Yes.
super happy about that. Yeah. And so you're up in Canada, right?
I am. Yeah, in Toronto, where we are enjoying some rather warm weather right now. Which, I mean, it's not that unusual for Toronto these days under like Toronto a la global warming has gotten very hot. So, yeah.
Yeah. You know what? It's crazy. So where I live, actually, so right now I live in Kentucky of all places, and every year it gets a little more hot, a little more
Yeah.
hot, a little more hot. And the rain, it's just weather is just crazy. It's like right now back home, it's somewhere around like 98 degrees with pretty intense humidity because we're in this like valley. So
Oh, damn.
humidity's no fun. I don't like the humidity.
Yeah, we get a lot of humidity here too. I mean, not like, Amazon rainforest humid, but like it gets fairly humid here in Toronto in the summer.
I've been up to Toronto a few times. I really enjoyed it. There was a few places, I don't even remember the names of the restaurants because it's been so long, but I remember the food was just so good. The places that we went, it was pretty awesome.
It is a foodie haven, so
yes.
Definitely.
So do you want to briefly introduce yourself to the audience? Who is Adriana, and what do you do day to day?
Yeah, so my name is Adriana Villela. I'm a senior staff developer advocate at ServiceNow Cloud Observability. We were formerly known as LightStep, but LightStep was acquired by ServiceNow 3 years ago, so hence the new name.
Awesome.
And so I have been in the observability space, I guess, for about 3 years, but I have been in tech for more than 20 years. I spent about 15 years of my career as a Java developer, and then fell into the DevOps space, which then eventually led me into observability. And I got into observability because I was managing an observability team when I worked at 2Cows. And if you remember 2Cows, the place where you could download free Windows software, it was that 2Cows.
I was wondering if that was the one. I was like, okay,
it was, but they pivoted their business, so they no longer did that. I think when I joined, they had kept that legacy site up until I think the year I joined. But when I joined, then they were like a domain wholesaler, and then they got into also the market of selling, I think it was activating SIM cards as well. So then they did like a spin-off company anyway. So but I got into observability because I was managing this observability team at 2Cows. And I'm like, well, I know kind of sort of a little bit about observability, but not enough to manage a team. So I better educate myself on the observabilities. And so I did like a lot of reading, a lot of asking questions. I got on a few Slacks, pestered a lot of people who were very kind to answer my questions. And then I documented my journey in my Medium blog. And then it got the attention of my now employer, who's like, how would you like to do this for a living? I'm like, giddy up.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
That's a cool story. Speaking of, so like one of the reasons, probably the thing I want to ask you the most is, recently on LinkedIn, a mutual connection, Ned Bellavance, Day 2 Cloud, he posted this like little blurb about his journey, from being like a 9-to-5er to going out and doing his own thing and ultimately landing with like Ned in the cloud. And you replied with this really interesting and just really inspiring story of your own like hard pivot to photography, and then followed up with an additional hard pivot. Would you mind just kind of telling that story? I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, sure. So I was at the time I was working at a bank, and I hated my job. It was like so boring. It was cushy. Like I was making decent money for the time, and my daughter I think was like 3 or 4 at the time, and but it was like the most uninteresting job ever. So I don't know, like I could have like just coasted, but I'm not that kind of person. Like I have to feel productive. It's probably the ADHD/anxiety in me. And so photography, I've always liked photography. I dabbled in the dark room in middle school, took some really crappy, photos and even crappier negatives and prints that I developed, but it was fun. And so I took a night school photography course, and it kind of made me fall in love with it even more. And I thought, you know what? Wouldn't it be fun if I ran my own photography business? Because I love photography. I'm bored with this tech thing. I need something. And it was meant to be like the career change of like, peace, I'm out. Bye, suckers. 9 to 5 lives. But it turned out that so it was a learning experience. I call it the best, worst year of my life, because I had to run my own business. It wasn't just about taking the photos. It was about making connections, putting myself out there, doing partnerships with other local small businesses who weren't photographers, but were adjacent. So I did a lot of family photography. So I partnered with there's a cafe near me that also had kind of a play area. So it was very family friendly, very toddler friendly. So I partnered with them. And then I partnered with baby stores and stuff. And I had to put myself out there, which was so hard because I'm so shy. And it was it took everything in me to do it. But I'm like, if I expect to make any money whatsoever, I have to do this, right? So I did that. And then I hustled hard. I put out regular newsletters, and I did blogging. I would blog about client sessions, and I offered discount sessions, and I offered what's called mini sessions. So it's a 15-minute session where you get smaller number of photos, and it's cheaper than a full 1-hour session kind of thing. And I played around a lot with different marketing tools. So social media, I did paid ads, I did unpaid ads, just through promoting through my social media without doing the Facebook boosts and stuff. I did print ads. I had to get good at Photoshop because I realized it's great to get things right on camera, but sometimes circumstances just don't allow for that. Kid blinks, parents for it's funny because I did candid photos, and parents for some reason they're into everyone's staring at the camera and smiling, and I'm I want to get those candid. So closing your eyes because you're having a good time wasn't necessarily okay with parents, so I had to learn to Photoshop eye swap. I did leg swaps even.
Oh wow.
Yeah, just to get things just the way that the clients wanted. And so I learned a lot during this time. I learned how to take better photos. I learned to not use cringy filters because you remember it was
overkill.
This was I want to say it was the early it was 2013 or so, maybe
the crazy filter
around
time.
That. So it was old ass Instagram times where everyone super into the filters, and I bought all these filters on Lightroom, and I'm this is awesome. And I remember I did some photos for a friend, and thank God it was a free shoot because she was so polite about it, but I could just see the horror in her eyes. And meanwhile I'm super proud of the work that I'd done.
I remember when that was happening because nothing looked real. Some of those filters were so crazy that you just it didn't look real.
It didn't. So I learned pretty early on to not do that and just go for a very natural sort of look. So lesson learned. But I had to learn a lot of interesting stuff too, how to price. my packages. That's so hard. And I realized that translates into the startup world too, right? If you're looking to put out a product, pricing is everything, because it's either going to scare off your clients or it's going to attract them to you. And listening to your clients' feedback, but also trying to understand who your ideal client is. That's another thing, because you don't want to be like the discount photographer, the Sears photographer that like, yeah, you get volume, but then like, are you proud of your craft? And I was very proud of my craft. So I want to be like the more like boutique photographer, but then that means like fewer people are willing to pay the prices that I needed to charge because I spent so much time editing the photos. So, after a while, and there were times where I made money. There were times when I did not. And thank you, savings, for keeping me afloat during this time. But, after a year, I was at a crossroads where I thought to myself, well, I started like seeing some results on like the tweaks that I'd made to my pricing and my SEO and all that stuff. And I'm like, yeah, this could work. I mean, the first couple of years of a business are the hardest. So it wasn't like I was looking to quit because, I wasn't doing well. It's like, it was do I actually want to do this for the rest of my life? And when I realized the answer was no, and then I thought, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. Like I told all these people that I was never going to return to tech. And then I thought, who cares? This is my life. I do what I want.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah. So I got back into tech, but super reinvigorated. And it was like, it made me so grateful when I got it back in. So I was like super happy. And I think the role that I ended up taking on to when I got back, which oddly enough was the same team that I had left under a different manager. So I got back into my old team through reputation because my coworkers vouched for me, but it was different work. It was more interesting work. We were doing like a big product migration. And I just sort of like, I was brought in to do one thing, and I just sort of stepped in and started like orchestrating the whole migration, because I'm like, all right, this is not being done properly. So I came in like guns a-blazing, and just, it became like, it was interesting work to me. So it was I never had those moments where I was like sitting at my desk after lunch, almost falling asleep, because that's what kept happening. And I don't ever want that again. I want to be like always on. Like I need stimulating work. So yeah.
Maybe stepping away kind of like that. I don't know. Perspective can just be, I mean, I know that like several things have happened in my life where it changed my like my overall perspective and just helped like motivate me and just get me back in with like a high energy, just high interest and stuff. So yeah, sometimes maybe stepping away, and of course a lot of times you can't do that in tech because you step away for too long and you lose out, you lose out on knowledge, on learning. The industry changes, technology changes way too quick, which is awesome, but it's also a double-edged sword. So that's just a really cool story. And it's cool because, I mean, I work for a startup now, but I used to work for a lot of big enterprise companies. And that was kind of like a thing, like my rebel moment. I'm like, okay, if I'm ever going to go work for a startup, now's the time.
Yeah.
I don't want to do this when, my kids are older and everything. And, I need to be a lot more well-established with different things. So yeah, I was like, ooh, I'm going to work for a startup. This is cool. It's, just different. And it was really motivating and just really awesome at the end of the day. But yeah, thanks for sharing that. I just think that's a really cool story. And I think it, it kind of motivates, because a lot of folks may have like an idea, they want to go do something, but they're scared. They don't want to try it. They don't think maybe they can, or maybe they think if they step away from their 9 to 5, I talked to somebody the other day that's like, oh, it's like wrong. I can't step away. You have to have a 9 to 5, and really you don't.
Yeah.
You can, so it's, just one of those things. I also noticed on your YouTube channel that you appear to have a interest in rock climbing, which is super cool. No hockey up in Toronto. We're gonna rock climb.
Yeah,
I love it.
I am that. Like, so as I mentioned to you before we started, I am not a sports person. I don't watch professional sports, but there is one sport I will watch. I will watch rock climbing on YouTube.
That is awesome. When did you start doing that, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, so I started doing it in 2002. And there's like different types of rock climbing. There's 3 types. There's sport climbing, which is the kind that you see like with the rope. And then there is speed climbing, which the goal is to get up the wall as quickly as possible. And then there's bouldering, which the walls aren't as high. I think they're like tops 15 feet high, which is still like scary. And you have no rope. And there's a big fluffy mat to cushion your fall, but don't fall improperly. It leads to injury. So I got into like the sport climbing side of things, doing what's known as top rope, which it means that the rope is anchored at the top of the wall. So there's a person, as you're climbing, there's a person belaying you. And then there's another type of rope climbing called lead climbing, which is basically as you go up, you're clipping. I have not done that. That's a scarier form. So I got started in that. And then my husband, when we met at work, he was trying to like impress me. So he took up rock climbing to spend more time with me, which is so cute. And we did it together for a really long time. Then when my daughter was born, we had to stop because kids. And then when she was old enough, we're like, let's take her to the climbing gym. But we couldn't do the rope climbing because you need like 2 people. And one of us had to like watch the kid running around. So we got into bouldering because then she could climb while one of us watched her / climb next to her. And then the other one could just do like their own session. Then we'd swap. And she got into bouldering. So now we boulder as a family.
That is so cool. I love that.
16.
That's awesome. That is so neat. Well, so at some point, I'm going to ask you something about observability, but I'm digging this conversation right now, the way it's going, and I just got to ask. So you, I guess, so you have a tech podcast yourself called Geeking Out, right? Which is a very cool name. And what's even more cool about this, is you run it with your daughter.
I do, which
is so cool. How did that start?
So it started because like I used to have a podcast through work called On Call Me Maybe, which was an awesome name. But
that
then
is an awesome name.
It was like so good. And my coworker Anna and I used to do it together. And then unfortunately we were told that there's no more funding for it. But I'm like, I still want to do a podcast. And I was like so upset last year when we were told like it could not continue. And I was like, I was complaining to my daughter and she's like, we could like start a podcast together and I could do the editing for you. And I'm like, really? Because it's a lot of work to do it. Like we had for On Call Me Maybe, we had somebody like editing our episodes and who would send it out for transcription. And for Geeking Out, like my daughter Hannah does the editing, and then I use some AI tooling to do like the transcription, and then I have to do human intervention because sometimes it doesn't get the words right. So so there's like so much prep for an episode, and so I have like mad respect for all the podcasters out there who are like hustling hard because it is so much work to do, and especially because we do like audio and video, because I want to like, some people don't like just audio. Like my dad is like, I hate podcasts. I only watch YouTube videos. I'm like, okay. So I know there are people like that out there. So I try to cater to both.
Yeah, it's what's funny about that? I used to only listen to podcasts exclusively like on walks and different things, but there's some conversations are really interesting when you can see facial expressions and different things. It kind of it adds that extra dimension. It's pretty cool.
So true.
Yeah, that's why I do video too. I think it's just, it's cool. And I like watching them sometimes. So, yeah. How old is your daughter?
She's 16. And she's currently gallivanting around Europe with her school. They were there for the D-Day celebrations yesterday. So she sends me a picture where she is like literally like a few feet away from Prince William and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And we're like, what? So jealous.
Oh man, why whenever I was in school, why couldn't we do anything cool like that? And that is such cool experience for her, like doing that kind of, but even like the podcast, like getting to her jumping in. I think that is just so cool, like jumping in and saying, hey, I'll do the post processing, I'll help out, let's do this. That is so cool. Major props, Hannah. That's awesome. If you ever hear this, you are awesome. So, I guess I also wanted to mention you you released a course through O'Reilly Media, Fundamentals of Observability. I think, was that this year?
Yeah, it was this year. I think it came out, I want to say it came out in March. It was a year of blood, sweat, and tears. I started, I did the proposal with them last year, just before KubeCon Europe. So it was around February, March. And then, and then it's been a year in the making. They accepted the proposal, and then it was hustle. My summer, fall was spent working on the course.
Oh, yeah, I know how much. So I do LinkedIn learning content, and I know it is a ton of work. It's the last course that I did, I was already busy with my normal job. So I was doing all of it on weekends and late nights. Oh, it was so hard. Yeah, major props in doing a good course too. You realize how much I thought I knew this one piece of this topic very well, but then you realize, okay, maybe I didn't know it that well. And then you have to, of course, augment your own research and your own understanding as well. But yeah, super cool. I'll link that in the show notes, so people can check it out. I might be checking it out too, because I need to brush up on the, observability, which is, so big right now. And then speaking of observability, I guess we got to get to the tech at some point. But so when I started working in tech, a long time ago, organizations, they did monitoring. They did not have observability. And that was riddled with these good old things called SNMP strings. Lots of things called MIBs, management information base, OIDs, this really old and just, it seemed to just transcend time for the longest time. And until cloud came along, and then, cloud really disrupted the status quo all over the place. But, things have changed now a lot, obviously. And nowadays this is called observability. And, I honestly remember, I think it was when I first started hearing about observability more, I think it was 2018, 2019, or somewhere along those lines when I started paying attention. But I guess we could start out with how would you define observability, at a high level?
Yeah, sure. So I want to say the classical definition of observability, which was coined by Charity Majors, which comes from control theory, which is the ability to look out at a system from the outside and understand its inner workings without knowing the nitty gritty of the inside. So you can still understand what's up, right? And I think it's evolved a little bit from that. And now the definition of observability that I really like is from Hazel Weekly, which is the ability to ask meaningful questions of your system and get useful answers.
I love that's. I haven't heard that one before. That's great. Charity Majors isn't Honeycomb, right?
Yeah, she's the CTO of Honeycomb.
Yeah, brain disconnect there. Okay, that's awesome. Observe it. Yeah, so that's huge. And I think the more, so we used to have sort of a technical landscape, back with the monolithic application design, and you didn't have a ton of things that were sending telemetry, really. You didn't have a ton of interaction surfaces, if you will. But now, with APIs, API integrations, open source, there's interaction surfaces everywhere, and everything is more interconnected than ever.
Yeah.
Which is why, that makes observability just hugely important. And I think, one thing I'm hearing about nowadays is this, the whole 1.0 and 2.0 moniker. I'm hearing okay, this transition from observability 1.0 to 2.0. What does this mean?
So I think
2.0.
Yeah, so really, I think 1.0 was our first attempt at observability, right? Where it's kind of rising from the ashes of monitoring, and so we're kind of feeling our way through it, and it's still very, very operations based, and it's still very based on known unknowns in the same way that monitoring was. And the idea that, you still you've got your signals, your traces, metrics, and logs, but they're not necessarily correlated. Maybe you're putting a lot of emphasis on your metrics or your logs because that's something that we're familiar with. So that was observability 1.0. It's we're starting to move the needle in the right direction. And observability 2.0 which I believe was also coined by Charity, is this idea of like observability 2.0, I think is what is delivering on the promise of observability. So it's really dealing with those unknown unknowns, right? Because as you mentioned, like our systems are so complex. The interactions are just bananas. Like we don't even know sometimes, like, and our users, our users bring chaos to our systems just by using our systems because we can't predict how they're going to use them. And that means that we can't predict how services are going to interact with each other. So really embracing the fact that like, we don't know what we don't know, but let's make sure that we have the information at hand so that we can figure out what it is. And it's also moving beyond this idea, like, yes, we've got the signals of observability, traces, metrics, and logs, which we refer to as the 3 pillars before. And I hate that term because it makes them seem like they're siloed from each other. And really it's, and I was having the same discussion yesterday with Whitney Lee on her show Enlightening. And she described it as like, it's like a braid. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly it. It really is like these things are interconnected because you have to have a correlation between these 3 signals in order to understand what's going on. But most importantly, making sure that the trace is really front and center of your system, because the traces give you that end-to-end view of what's going on, and then the metrics and the logs are like the supporting characters that provide you that extra bit of information. So really that's what observability 2.0 is all about, is really fulfilling the promise of observability.
That's such a good definition. Yeah, and the crazy amount of interaction. So something that so in my limited time with doing anything with observability, the biggest challenge, honestly, was I would say like from a from like a greenfield perspective, like, okay, part of our business, we have like new apps, we're building them cloud native, we have APIs, we have standardized ways of retrieving data and doing things with that data. But then some of these things would be interacting with like these legacy systems, and it's like, okay, we don't have APIs. In fact, what data can we actually get from this thing at all? And I think I really look forward to, some of these older systems and older applications. Some of them will be sunsetted, some of them will probably die in a data center someday. Some of them are going to be, modernized with cloud or, whatever else. And it's just thinking of like, okay, the future, like APIs are like a currency at that point, and that makes the whole picture much easier, especially if you're not if you're not a tech company and you're like an enterprise trying to leverage some of these things and garner like value from them, So I think, so the next thing so you're part of the CNCF, you're an ambassador, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you're in the open, you work with the OpenTelemetry project?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So I'm one of the maintainers of the OpenTelemetry end user SIG. So what we do is we try to connect end users with each other, share end user stories, because I think when you're getting started with a new technology like OpenTelemetry, it can be really scary. And so it's really cool to be able to hear how different folks in different organizations are using OpenTelemetry, like learn about their journey. So one of the things that we do every month, or we try to anyway, is do OpenTelemetry Q&A, where we sit down with an end user and they talk about how they use OpenTelemetry within their organization. And so we usually record these interviews and then we post them on the OTel YouTube channel, which is called OTel-Official. So you can see all of those interviews on there. We also do something called OTel in Practice, which is basically a meetup style sort of thing where someone who has an interesting thing that they want to share about OTel that they learned, you have a talk about OTel, like come to OTel in Practice and share your talk, test it out. If it's something that you're shopping around for different conferences or whatever, a great place to test it out and to just use that as the basis for iterating your talk concept or whatever. Also, it's such a great opportunity to share cool things with other folks in the community. that they might not have known about OTel. So, and we have those on the OTel YouTube channel as well. And then we run a bunch of surveys and user surveys. So, for example, the OTel collector. So the OTel collector, for folks who aren't familiar, it's basically you can think of it as a data pipeline. So it's used to ingest OTel data from your application, from your infrastructure, from wherever, anything that emits OTel, it can ingest data from there. And then it can transform your data. So it can be like you can add or remove attributes, you can mask data, especially for PII data. You can use it to batch your data, various sorts of things that you can do it. And then it exports the data somewhere, the somewhere being like usually an observability backend, or it can be your standard out on your machine. And so like the collector SIG came up to us and said, hey, we really want to get some feedback from users to drive the roadmap for the collectors so that we're actually developing features that are useful to the people. And so we ran this survey with them and ran it for about a month or so. And then we also did like a panel discussion. So we gathered, I want to say 4 or 5 end users, and we did like a panel discussion on Zoom where we got some feedback from end users live, getting to talk to folks on the collector SIG to again, just to get that kind of feedback. So then we were able to collect that information and then disseminate it back to the OTel collector SIG. So now they can do something useful. So we've done that also for there's a OTel and Prometheus interoperability working group. So they approached us for that. We ran a survey on getting started with OTel. Like, what's your experience with getting started with OpenTelemetry? What would you like to improve, right? Because open source, it's awesome that it's free, but it also means that a lot of the folks who are working on it on their own time or whatever, like there's always room for improvement. So these are the types of things that we do with the SIG right now.
That is so cool. I love the short form OTel. Like some of the short form for some of the tech groups and different things, you just hear them and you cringe. But OTel, it just rolls off the tongue. It's just so smooth. It sounds so cool, and yeah, pretty neat. Yeah, I love a lot of the work that the CNC. Actually, a lot of my guests have been CNCF ambassadors. Actually,
cool.
I've had quite a few on. Just great work. And one thing I want to ask. How does OpenTelemetry fit into observability, like as a technology? What is the relationship there?
That is a really great question. So OpenTelemetry is basically this framework for emitting information about your system. So it's made up, so there's the specification, and it's made up of an API and an SDK. So the API defines the behavior, the SDK implements the behavior. And so we've got like APIs and SDKs defined for various languages, like so many languages. Pretty much anything you can think of, I think, is there. There's even work being done on OTel for mainframes. So
whoa,
yeah,
that's cool.
There you go, right?
Yeah, I worked in mainframe land for a while in healthcare, and yeah, they're never going away. I don't think they're sticking around forever.
I know. Yeah, I worked at a bank for 11 years, and like mainframe is king. I actually got to tour a data center, one of the data centers at the bank, and there was the mainframe like in all its glory, and like I was in awe of this thing that's like running the bank.
Yeah, they're cool. Like I think the last time I saw a zero downtime IBM mainframe, the last data center I was in doing work in, it was like maybe 5 years ago, and they just look really cool. I'm like, wow, I wonder if I could get one of those in my house. It's just cool. Like people would walk in and be like, ooh, what is that,
right?
William? That
it looks
so
futuristic.
Nice. Yeah. And you open them up and it's really cool. But at the end of the day, it's a mainframe. So,
Exactly.
Yeah.
So but OpenTelemetry, to answer your original question, like it enables observability. So you know how like the idea of the definition of observability, the ability to ask meaningful questions and get useful answers. The only way to do that is you have to have information at hand to be able to ask those questions. And OpenTelemetry enables you to emit those signals that we talked about earlier, those traces, those metrics, and those logs. And the cool thing about OpenTelemetry is that because it's vendor neutral, it means that, the different observability vendors are no longer competing on like whose framework is better. You're not spending mental capital on that right now. So it's got the backing of like most of the observability vendors. So a lot of us who work for vendors, we work on OpenTelemetry, we contribute because it's something that benefits us all. And so the differentiator then becomes so we're all ingesting the same data. So the differentiator is how do we present the data to the user in a way that's useful to them to be able to do their jobs.
That's such a good thing. I wish other technical verticals would. I mean, I think eventually they'll get there, but observability really seems to have its ducks in a row as far as that's concerned. Like having where all these vendors agree and we have this foundation that's, providing a framework or a blueprint. And this is like the standard, the baseline where we're all starting from. And then we can add on innovation and value add there that we can create meaningful products upon, but that's what's so beautiful about the CNCF. It's just awesome. And I hope that catches fire with some of the other areas of technology, because some of the other areas are they're pretty behind, and there's still like vendors own a lot of stuff and all the vendors do it completely different. And there's no agreed upon way of doing much of anything because it's just a power grab a lot of times. And so that's awesome. That's good to hear. How do you go about, so for the benefit of those listening in, how do you go about if you're interested in open source and you want to get involved with the CNCF? How did you become an ambassador?
So I think the ambassadorship program's been around for a while, but I think they had closed it off to like new ambassadors for a bit because I believe they were rejigging the process, the whole program. And so I think it was at the end of 2022, they had like opened up the admissions for the ambassador program. And at that point, I'd been working in OpenTelemetry for, I guess, since I joined my current company. So it had been like less than a year. But they opened up the applications, and I'm like, I've been like very heavily involved in this community for OpenTelemetry. But prior to that, I'd done a lot of blogging as well on various things in Kubernetes. So at the company before Two Cows, they were exploring the possibility of moving to Kubernetes from I think it was Azure App Services. So they were in Azure shop and they were using Azure App Services, and they're like, maybe we'll use Kubernetes. So I was like playing around with, I was the only one on my team who had, I was in a release engineering team. I was the only one on my team who like had any Kubernetes experience. So I was like playing around, and I'm like, if we're going to use Kubernetes, we should use Argo CD to like manage our deployments. But I didn't know much about Argo CD. So I was like learning on the fly, blogging about it as I went along. So I'd done like a lot of stuff of just playing around with like different projects and blogging about my learnings as I was on this journey with this other company. And so I'm like, well, I've got the OpenTelemetry experience. I've got, the tech chops from writing my various Kubernetes blog posts. I'm going to apply. And, it's just, I think like for the application process, like, you need to answer like, what makes you a good CNCF ambassador? What are your accomplishments in the space? So they ask for like proof of like that the things that you said you did, you actually did. So, links to PRs, links to like, you don't even necessarily have to be like I think you do need to have like some sort of contribution to CNCF products, because I think they use something called dev stats to like measure like how much you've contributed in the CNCF ecosystem, if I'm not mistaken. It's a little voodoo-y for me how dev stats work, to be honest. Someone in the CNCF ambassador group like worked out something that could translate it to they created a tool that would translate it to like us humans who don't understand dev stats. So I'm like, Awesome. But but proving that you've done the contributions that you say you've been doing, and how it is that you would benefit how it is that you would contribute to the community as a CNCF ambassador. So I applied and I got in, and I found out just before going to KubeCon EU last year. And then I renewed again this year, and they renewed me this time for 2 years because I was a returning ambassador. So I believe the returning ambassadors, they renew for 2 years. So that's how I got in. Yeah, just getting wind of the program. Awesome. I'm like, I'm going to apply, you got nothing to lose by applying. And if you don't get in, then you keep at it and keep trying again next year.
That's awesome. Yeah, for anybody out there, it's worth just going to the CNCF website, looking at some of the different projects. And there's a Slack as well. You don't have to be an ambassador to get in the Slack. So join the Slack and, get some wisdom on what's going on in the open source world and where some of these products are headed and what's going on. It's super useful. Really awesome stuff. Well, I think I was trying to get this episode in under 30 minutes and I always fail.
Conversation's too good.
Yeah. Anyhow, I guess we better wrap it up. Thank you again. Thanks for coming on. This has been a really fun conversation. Do you want to tell the audience they can find you?
Oh, yeah. So you can find me on all my socials if you go to bento.me/Adriana M. Villela. So ADRIANA MVILLELA. So you'll be able to find all my socials on there, all in one place for your convenience.
Awesome. Very nice. All right. Well, thank you and enjoy the summer.